When I was 29, I was working at Union Pacific. It was my first corporate job. I was so excited. I was working in benefits, and I had the responsibility of taking care of all the board members. So this was really exciting for me as a 29-year-old, which seems very young to me now, actually. But then something started to happen. I started to get very sick. I was having nausea all the time, stomach cramps, couldn't eat. I didn't know what was going on. So, being responsible, went to the doctor, went through a million tests. Couldn't find anything. I would dehydrate. They'd have to put me in the hospital. I'd be in there for 3 or 4 days. And this happened for months and months and months on end. I'd lose a lot of weight. I'd start to feel better. They'd take me back out of the hospital. I'd go back to work. One GI person after another, one expert after another. And after a while, because they couldn't find anything, you can imagine what they were starting to think. This is probably in her head. She's probably just stressed out. That can't possibly be, if we can't find it as the experts, we've got to probably go down a different path here. And I remember being in a hospital bed at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and for anybody who's ever been in that place, it's not a very happy place to be, and it's scary. There was nobody my age at 29 that was going through anything like this. My friends didn't know what to say to me, and I started to question my own sanity, really. Like, am I bringing this on myself? And so the very next day, my GI guy came in, who was like the top of the top in the area, and basically verbalized what I had been thinking. Well, we really think this is in your head, and we really think you need to leave the hospital, and we're going to take you down a different path. And it was in that moment that this voice inside of me said, no. No. There is something wrong. And just because this expert with his white coat on is telling me that it's all in my head, I know it is not in my head. And something changed for me that day. And so I said, well, I don't agree with you, and I'm firing you. From my hospital bed with the IVs in my arms, which was a little crazy. And he's looking at me like, well, you can't do that. And I said, yes, I can. You're not listening to me, and you're not helping me. So the good news is I finally did find doctors who would listen. And I still had to go through a lot more until I became healthy. I found out I had a very rare hormonal disorder. I eventually had to have a partial hysterectomy at 34 because of this. But had I not listened to myself, had I not been brave enough to speak up, I may have lost my life. And for women, unfortunately, particularly in medical situations, this is very serious. So there is data out there that shows that women wait in emergency rooms 15 to 20 minutes longer than our male counterparts. That's documented. So think about that if you're having an aneurysm or a heart attack. It is so important for you to trust your voice. And I'm not blaming the doctors here. I'm really not, because the vast majority of medical research has been done on men and male animals. So let me repeat that. The vast majority of health research has been done on men and male animals. So doctors have been taught, and my dad was a neurophysiologist, and actually taught doctors. So it's been very interesting. He's since passed. But the more I started to dig into this and talk to people in the medical profession and started to read the research around us, I said, oh my gosh, this is craziness. So if you think about somebody going in and getting treated for depression, for example, and you're given a medication, and you're a male versus a female, do we metabolize drugs in the same way? Right. But if your doctor's prescribing something for you that's based on male physiology, do we really have health equity? I would argue no. So there has been some progress, but not enough. And one of the things that I am very passionate about is getting the word out about this, and it goes back to your doctor may not know everything. Use your voice. Listen to your body. Another kind of interesting piece of this for me, and particularly from a worksite wellness perspective, is the gender pay gap. So how many people are talking about that in your company or read anything about that? Yeah, right? Yeah, but who's ever talked about this in the context of mental health? Have you ever heard this correlation before? Right, everybody's going, what? So interestingly enough, Columbia University, and you can, this is why I cited this, you can go out and read this research. There is a direct correlation between a pay inequity in a workplace and a woman's increased risk for depression and anxiety. Interesting. We keep talking about these issues in silos, and what we need to start to do is think about how they are interconnected. I put this up at a big conference that I spoke at a few weeks ago, and I said we do so much training around what happens in a crisis and what's our plan if we have a extreme weather event. I said, but how much time do we really spend on the backup plan for the people that are executing on that plan? So I ask, if you look at this picture, can you tell me who's the single mom with 2 kids? Who's the guy that's on medication that if he gets stuck in a particular facility for 36 hours but doesn't have his medication, like what happens? What happens to your plan? Who here is taking care of an elderly parent that might be at risk and now they're going to be totally unfocused on the job that they need to get done? So mental health in a crisis situation is just another piece of the puzzle that we don't tend to spend enough time on. We talk about well-being, and all of that is good, but I would argue that in crisis, that's when it means the most, and that's what we really need to be prepared for. All this walking and eating well and mindfulness and all these things in these kinds of situations may mean saving someone's life. So I'd encourage you in your workplace to think about this. If you have a crisis management plan, maybe you want the people part of it attached to it. So I'm going to ask this question. My guess is in this audience, most people will raise their hand. So how many of you are familiar with your EAP in your organization? Yay! However, now put your hands up again for a second. Take a look around the room. So your EAP is your employee assistance program that is already in the workplace and people not actually using it. Now, I would argue that there's a whole host of reasons for that. There's stigma, right? We still have it. We don't want to talk about mental health. If I go get help, who's going to say something? There are the other issues around communications around this, because you might have 15 or 20 different benefits in your company, and this one just gets lost. And so I encourage you to go back to your organizations and take a look at this. The other piece of the puzzle here is the difference between equal treatment and equitable treatment. Does anybody have a problem with this one? Good question. So this is why I use the top. So equal treatment is everybody gets the same, right? So everybody up there gets a bicycle, that's it. Now we can all go home because everybody got equal treatment. But if you look at that picture, I think it very clearly illustrates why equal is different than equitable. And so when we're designing for mental health and well-being, particularly through a gender lens, we've got to be a little bit more thoughtful about how we're communicating, who our audience is, have we looked at the data in our organization and really start to understand, do we have older women, older men, younger men, through a diversity lens? And typically what you get is the one size fits all. Well, we have this mental health thing. We're going to bring in some mindfulness. Everybody can just go and do this. So I'm going to be a little bit sarcastic here as somebody who's been in the wellness world a long time. We've been doing yoga and stress management and sexual harassment training, for good 30 years now. And I would argue that there's got to be something missing. It doesn't mean that it's bad or that it wasn't well-intentioned. But clearly, our costs are going up. We know that people are getting lonelier. We know that people are getting more stressed. We know that we have more people that are now type 2 diabetics and are pre-diabetic. So we have to start to think about this through a little bit different lens and get a little bit more creative. Now, the good news is that if you start to design programs for your organization, this isn't just about your workforce. It's also about you being an employer of choice. Because our millennials have gotten a whole lot smarter about this. They watched their parents kill themselves for organizations, and many of them got kicked to the curb. They really did. And so millennials have come up and said, you know what? Not for me. I want to know that you're going to take care of me. And that has played out in the data. So Goldman Sachs did data around this about, I'm going to say 5 years ago. Having a better approach about emotional and mental health in your organization can actually make you an employer of choice. Very big positive. And we need to take things out of silos. Really. It drives me crazy when we go in and we're going to have, okay, this month we're just going to talk about this. Woohoo! And then the next month we're going to talk about this. And then the next month we're going to talk about this. And the deal is that, again, very well intentioned, but does that actually make change? Right, we get in the head nods, right? Anybody who's been doing this long enough knows it doesn't work. But if we can start to get smarter about how we design, real design thinking in our organizations, we have a much better chance of making a real difference. Now, from the Global Women for Wellbeing perspective, I wanted to talk just briefly about these three pieces. Caregiving for women is one of the biggest issues that impacts our health and well-being and our ability to lead well. The data shows it over and over and over again. I don't want to discount the great men in the room that are good caregivers. There are very just wonderful men that are out there taking care of parents and children. But AARP data, and which is just one of the reports that's come out over the past 4 or 5 years, clearly shows this has a huge impact on women. Women are much more likely to tap into their 401k dollars to take care of their parents, more than their male counterparts. And I was at a conference where I talked to a woman who told me exactly that. She was 57 years old. Her mother had not had any savings really to take care of herself. And she went through every single penny of her 401k, and she was starting all over again at 57 years old. So when we talk about financial well-being in the workplace, it is different for women. And that has a huge impact on your health and well-being, including emotional and mental health. We have to do this connecting piece in our heads, that these things do not sit separately. And we also have to look at these two pieces and how women are viewed as leaders. So, caregivers, right? I bring this up. I actually did this as an exercise, and I know we just have a little bit of time, but when you hear family man versus working mother, yeah, I'm seeing smiles, right? It brings up different things, doesn't it, for you? So the sad fact is that if you are a higher paid executive male and you are a family man, and I'm not blaming men here, okay? That's not where we're going. But you will actually get a salary bump because you're a family man and you're supporting your family. But if you're a lower paid working mother, you actually get dinged financially. That's the data. And so we have to start to question how we think about these things. What are the stories that we grew up with that influenced us, that made us think, well, this is who I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be the breadwinner. I'm supposed to be the caregiver. We need to reimagine what our future looks like if we're truly going to solve for this and have emotional and mental health and well-being for all of us, men and women. So this is clearly a passion for me. And it's not enough for us to just talk about it. We need research. We need solid research because everybody will say, yeah, that's a great story. That's awesome. Oh, we're so happy. So when we started GW4W, we said, we're going to be research-based. And everybody's like, well, what are you going to do research on? And we're like, the first thing we're going to do is actually do a research literature review, because doesn't it make sense to figure out what has actually been studied instead of just going out there and getting emotional about something and say, we're going to look at the breast cancer piece of it, which is great, don't get me wrong. All of that has been amazing. But we have to take 3 steps back. Because the sad fact is that women in leadership at the tops of organizations in literally every profession, that top rung, right underneath the C-suite, those numbers have not changed in 10 years. 10 years. It doesn't mean that we aren't educated enough. It doesn't mean that we don't want it enough. But there are barriers that are in the workplace that we need to get addressed. And part of it has to do with what happens outside the walls, because it is a very uneven playing field. And so what we did is we wanted to show the complexity of what this is and start to tie women's health and well-being issues to how we're viewed as leaders, but also how it impacts us as leaders. So that was our starting point. and say we cannot look at these things in little tiny buckets if we really want to make this different for our daughters and our sons. Because we know that when you have truly inclusive teams at the top, and this is Harvard Business Review data, Gallup data, it's all out there, folks. What's exciting is that when you have truly integrated teams, gender, diversity, you innovate faster, you're more resilient as teams, and you're going to have a competitive edge. So there is a very good business case for this. And we need to start talking about it in a more intentional and strategic way. We want to be resilient and thriving. And you heard so many stories about how difficult it is, and I would argue that we are in an overly stressed time. I have to turn off the news myself. My husband's a news junkie, and I'm like, man, please just turn it off. I cannot listen to any more of this arguing, on either side of the fence. But the other side of this, as you heard about the healthcare crisis and other things, is that we are truly in this country moving towards a burning platform. Whether we're talking about healthcare or innovation or education, we need the best minds, the best teams solving for this. And so it is an imperative that we start to look at gender equity in a different way, that we look at leadership and inclusive leadership in a different way. So I'm going to end with this. One of our taglines is use your voice. Use your voice. But voice is not just about speaking out for yourself or potentially speaking out for somebody who can't use their own voice. It's about a vision for the future that we can collectively come together and make happen. We can open up opportunities for each other. The more cross-disciplinary conversations that happen, the more opportunity we open up. And let's not sugarcoat this. This is not an easy path. And the only way we're going to get down this and make real change is through inspiration. And that's why these stories, that's why I'm so proud and so honored to be here with Shelley and to be here with Emra. Because this is how we inspire us when you're slogging through the mud and you don't know if you're going to get to the next thing. Are we really going to make a difference? That's how we keep going. We keep looking for that light. And the bigger piece of connection. Connect, connect, connect. Not one of us has all the answers. But man, together, we are a powerhouse of passion and intelligence and experience. Good men and good women together. This is about all of us. And in that way, we can truly empower a different future for our children and our children's children. So I thank each and every one of you for using your voice and being here today. And I would like to invite our panel up so we can continue the conversation.